Okay, in my chapter in the Handbook, I try to understand how different type of organization can shape the governance of markets and industries. And I focus on what's going on in the digital activities. More precisely, I'm trying to understand why the oldest intergovernmental organization in the world, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, was unable to govern the development of the Internet. The ITU was initially established in 1865 to allow the development of international telecommunications through the telegraph system. When the telephone was invented, then when the radio communication was developed, then when satellite communication was developed, all those new wave of technologies were taken into charge by the ITU. The ITU is responsible for developing common standards for those systems, but also to develop the rules along with those different networks could be relied upon by operators, and how, in fact, operators should organize the relationship among themselves. However, when the Internet developed, another organization emerged, the ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. This organization is US-based. This is a non-governmental organization established in the US. And in our days, in practice, the ICANN is at the center of an ecosystem that governs Internet. How is it possible that a private organization was able to take control of the new communication technologies instead of this old and relatively efficient international organization? This is the trick, the question that is raised by my paper. When you study the ICANN in fact doesn't claim to be responsible for the governance of the Internet. And for sure, de jure, the ICANN is not responsible for the governance of the Internet. However, the ICANN is a very influential organization in the middle of a network of other organizations that de facto govern the Internet. Apparently, the ICANN is only responsible for some technical mechanism of governance of the Internet. But with digital technologies, the way you govern the network, the way you govern the technology impacts on the way you can use the technology. It impacts on the services that could be developed. It impacts on the logic along which services are distributed, whether they are public services or commercial services. It impacts on the rights of the users, whether they have a right to privacy, for instance. They impact on the type of participants to the system and the hierarchy among those participants, whether in fact you have government and citizens and the government being more important than the citizens, or whether you have all type of stakeholders that are invited to the table and participating to the governance, of the system. And in practice, the ICANN has been the organization that has been driving the Internet we know today, which is more based on a logic of commercial activities, of free speech, etc., which is basically reflecting the values of the American society rather than the values of other societies. So in this paper, I try to understand how, in fact, this ICANN, this organization, this private non-governmental organization established in the US was able to gain control over the governance of the Internet. There are several theories to explain this competition between the ITU and the ICANN. One of them is based on the idea that the traditional governance system based on government is a hierarchical system which is not very well featured to manage the diversity and the dynamism of digital technologies. And this model is contrasted with another model qualified of organically developed institution that basically rely on a more biological type of approach of governance where all the players, especially the more dynamic, have a say in the building of rules that are governing a community. And typically, you should have in mind what's going on in communities of software developers who agree on common standards for developing code, etc. Of course, this is part of the explanation, but this is not enough. In fact, the competition between the ITU and the ICANN was also a competition in terms of legitimacy. Typically, the ITU progressively lost its legitimacy to govern international telecommunication system and international digital system. And this was driven by several factors. One of the factors was that after World War II and after the independence of new nation state in the 1960s, the ITU became a tool in the hand of some developing countries to fight against neocolonialism, to make it short. And this basically led the member states in the ITU, especially the Western states, to no longer trust the ITU. But in fact, you had other factors. Typically, before the digital revolution, before the digitization of all communication, in fact, the communication systems were based on different technologies, and the digitization of communication and the convergence between the computers and the telecommunication system undermine, in fact, the legitimacy of the ITU, because new industries had to step in to contribute to the development and the governance of the development of the technology and the governance of the new digital system. Also, in fact, by definition, a digital system is a system in which you have a very large scope of services, while the traditional telecommunication system were based on single services, the telephone, the telegraph, the television, etc., etc. Digital systems, the internet, allows to provide all types of services in very different ways, which have very different logic. And then the ITU, which was relatively well established or well designed to manage the provision of public services on the basis of homogeneous services, was less agile to address the issue of a multi-service digital system. And in addition, those multi-service systems, they supply or they support the supply of very different types of services. Telecommunication services, of course, but also information services, trade through digital platforms, etc. And in fact, again, the ITU was not well shaped to govern those different types of systems of transactions. So the digital revolution progressively undermines the legitimacy of the ITU to govern the global digital system. But something else occurred. This something else is what did happen in the US when the internet started to be open to all stakeholders in the society. Initially, the internet was a digital network and a digital system aimed at supporting the exchange and the sharing of capabilities among researchers in the research community. But then the government decided to, the US government that was sponsoring the development of the internet, decided to open the internet to all stakeholders in the American economy, in the American industry, in the American society, because of the potential of the internet into supporting, in fact, a digital revolution supposed to bring a lot of productivity gains and new services for the society. However, when the US government opened the internet to all kinds of stakeholders, there were a lot of disagreement about the way the internet should be governed. Typically, for instance, the initial technical community wanted to have the internet provided on a free basis like a public good, while in the industry, many players were considering that the services that were developed thanks to digital technology should be, in fact, distributed under a commercial logic. So the US government stepped in and supported the development of some neutral organizations that were responsible for governing the various dimensions of the internet. ICANN was one of them. So the US government understood the interest of this neutral organization that was able to balance the interest of various stakeholders within the US society. And in fact, it promoted the international expansion of this organization to the management of the global information society infrastructure that internet is. How did it do so? Simply, first, the US government provided for free the technology of the internet to all countries in the world, to all stakeholders in the world. Internet is a set of standards, of open standards, and anybody who wants to comply with these standards is de facto, in a sense, a user of the internet and a potential contributor to the internet. So the US government, in fact, provided its technology to the world. But this technology came with the governance mechanism that is basically intrinsic to this technology, the ICANN and other sister organizations that are all together governing not only the technology but also the various use of the internet. And the US government progressively was able to build a coalition with corporation, with various type of citizens organization, with various nation states. And this coalition was, in a sense, stronger than the alternative coalition that was supporting the governance of the internet by the ITU. And so this story of competition between a public organization, the ITU, and a private organization that has the ICANN, both types of international organization in the sense that they are managing international resources, international common goods, in fact, is based on a competition between two models, but also a competition between two types of legitimacy. That is, on the one hand, the legitimacy of intergovernmental agreement, which is basically beyond the logic of the ITU, and the legitimacy of the stakeholders adopting a common solution, which is basically the legitimacy of the ICANN.